Top of the morning to you. Welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Olumide Macaulay. The headlines. Ukraine President Vladimir Zelensky and wife Olena arrive in Canada to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's welcome. Polish President says Prime Minister's words about arms supplies to Ukraine interpreted the worst possible way. Plus, Turkey's President Recep Erdogan says he doesn't agree with others' negative approach towards President Putin. Thank you for joining us this morning. The Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky and his wife Olena Zelenska arrived in Canada late Thursday to a warm welcome from the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. He will address the Canadian Parliament in Ottawa and will also touch down in Toronto to meet with Canadian business leaders to strengthen private sector investment in Ukraine. In June, Mr. Trudeau made an unannounced trip to wartime Kyiv, where he paid his respects at a memorial to Ukrainian soldiers killed fighting pro-Russian forces since 2014, and also addressed Ukraine's parliament. President Zelensky wrapped up his U.S. visit just before going on to Canada. Meanwhile, after the Ukrainian president met with U.S. lawmakers, military leaders, and U.S. President Joe Biden in a blitz across Washington on Thursday, he and his wife Olena ended the evening with speeches at the U.S. National Archives Museum, thanking and reassuring the U.S. that its investment in Ukraine's security is working. Earlier in the day, U.S. President Joe Biden assured Mr. Zelensky that strong U.S. support for his war to repel Russian invaders will be maintained. President Biden and Zelensky held a war council in the White House East Room as part of many appearances of the Ukraine leader to bolster U.S. support for a war that began in February 2022 and still has no end in sight.
Half of Europe would again be in our victorious battles for Ukraine and Kharkiv and the Snake Island in the Black Sea, in our battle for Bakhmut, where our soldiers are pressing forward no matter the challenges, in our battle for every inch of Ukrainian land. Every day of this war, Ukrainian soldiers hold on with the grip of a bulldog. They chew and choke the Russian occupiers as much as possible. Never before had the Russian dictatorship met such strong resistance. And never again will Russia manage to destroy any other nation. Putin's list was long. Just recently, after Ukraine, if we fall, half of Europe would again be in danger of being in Moscow's sphere of influence. But American investment in Ukrainian security and global protection of freedom is working 100%, every cent.
Vladimir Zelensky, president of Ukraine. Meanwhile, in the Ukrainian president's opinion, his trip to the U.S. has yielded significant results after President Joe Biden announced more military aid for Kyiv. Speaking in a self-recorded video, he thanked President Biden for the new defense package, including a long-term agreement which will see Ukraine produce necessary weapons with the United States. Dressed in military green to reflect his status as a wartime leader, Mr. Zelensky described the cooperation between the two nations as historic. U.S. President Joe Biden, meanwhile, has declared that Russia alone stands in the way of peace. He made this statement after a White House meeting with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, where he assured him of continued U.S. support. The United States has sent approximately $113 billion in security and humanitarian aid to help Zelensky's government since Russia invaded in February 2022.
liberty. Mr. President, the American people, Democrats, Republicans alike, families all across our nation understand what Ukraine is fighting to defend, what generations of Americans have also stepped up to protect and preserve. It's pretty basic: freedom, liberty, and sovereignty. And as I made clear at the UN this week, and you were there, the entire world has a stake in making sure that no nation, no aggressor is allowed to take a neighbor's territory by force. The American people will never waver in our commitment to those values. That's why, together with our allies and partners, we will continue to provide security assistance to support Ukraine's progress in reclaiming its territory. And we'll continue to provide humanitarian aid to help millions of innocents suffering from Russia's aggression. Russia alone stands in the way of peace. It could end this today. Instead, Russia is seeking more weapons from Iran and North Korea that would violate multiple UN Security Council resolutions that Moscow itself voted to put in place.
U.S. President Joe Biden, his Polish counterpart, Andrzej Duda, is unhappy about how his statement about arms supply to Ukraine is being seen, saying it's been interpreted in the worst possible way. Speaking to Polish private broadcaster TVN, he referred to the Prime Minister's words that Poland is no longer arming Ukraine and is focusing on rebuilding its own weapon stocks. The words were widely commented on in world media and appeared amidst souring bilateral relations due to a grain dispute just weeks before a Polish parliamentary election. Poland's decision to extend a ban on Ukrainian grain imports is rubbing Kiev the wrong way. Poland has been seen until recently as one of Ukraine's staunchest allies in its war with Russia. The president told reporters that Ukraine should remember it receives help from Poland and compared Kiev to a drowning person. By the way, Mr. Duda and Mr. Zelensky did not hold a scheduled meeting on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly due to overall delay in the speeches at the United Nations. Now, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg says NATO had tried to engage Russia in a diplomatic dialogue before Russia invaded Ukraine in 2021. In an interview with the Council on Foreign Relations in New York on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly, Mr. Stoltenberg said the invasion was part of a pattern that included Russian military action in Donbass and Crimea in Ukraine in 2014. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan appears to be a dissenting voice in the West's approach to Russia's President Vladimir Putin, which he calls negative. President Erdogan warned that Russia is not a country to be disregarded and repeated his hope for a solution to revive the Black Sea Grain Initiative. According to President Erdogan, in terms of grain production, Russia is one of the few countries in the world right now. Now let's bring in international affairs analyst, Mr. Yinko Yeniji. Mr. Yeniji is speaking virtually from East Midlands in the UK. Good morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning, Mr. Marcoli.
Thank you for being with us. It was not too far back that a senior UK official was criticized or presented as saying that he wasn't happy with the way Ukraine was asking of arms of the UK, saying that this isn't Selfridges, or he mentioned a department store when President Zelensky was referring to arms for Ukraine. This is not too far removed from what has happened between Ukraine and Poland, who are one of Ukraine's staunchest allies, but who now have been taken by Ukraine to the WTO over the dispute concerning grain agriculture produce supply. How do you perceive this entire situation, knowing that now that Poland says, look, we're not supplying any more weapons to you, which other way could it be interpreted but as a pushback against Ukraine?
The unfortunate development regarding the forceful invasion of Ukraine by Russia has many consequences that we cannot exhaust. I must tell you. I told you sometimes back on this program that many nations that are offering military support to Ukraine are also being exposed locally in their own economy and also in the political space. Now, there's no security in the world without trade underlining it. In the same vein, there's no international relationship or alignment which doesn't have security and economy at the back of it. So there's no trade except there's security. Now, typically of nations such as Germany, France, the United Kingdom, and a few NATO countries that had a reason to support Ukraine at the start of this war, they have their military might being depleted. They are putting it very nicely, okay? They've had to move weapons and possible alert aircraft and these things are eating deep into the budgetary expenses for military in their own country. For example, in the United Kingdom, Ben Wallace has since left the scene. And even as he was leaving, he was talking about the United Kingdom having to spend more to shore up our military reserves. It's the same thing in Germany. So everybody has come to the point of introspecting. Do we really need to continue to offer the support that we ourselves don't have? Many tanks have been lost in Ukraine, tanks that have been built and manufactured over time. Now, at least one missile that the United Kingdom offered Ukraine by which it hit specific targets in Crimea in the last 48 hours cost over $1 million. And the United States itself also lost an aircraft worth about $18 million in the last 2 or 3 weeks. Now, all of these put together show that the war is not sustainable at the rate of supplying weapons without considering local economy. So Poland would have to introspect to examine what reserves they have, if their economy can reinforce their depleted military might. And we go into a year where the political landscape is very, very uncertain. The United States is going into elections next year. And that is pivotal regarding how this war is perceived going forward.
Hasn't Ukraine opened up Poland to ridicule by Russia? Poland has vociferously lamented Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Ukraine now has embarrassed Poland by taking them to WTO in the face of the whole world.
Well, I'll tell you the truth, there's no embarrassment here. For all of those who can analyze in an unbiased manner without any emotions, we always knew the factors. We always knew the strengths here, and we always knew the limitations. At some point, like I stated earlier, when you enter into international trade, you are asking, what am I giving and what am I getting in return? Ukraine was the beautiful bride to everybody due to its own agricultural exports. Those have been threatened by the Black Sea trade that has been also trumped. At this time, Poland has to ask itself, what is the point in continuing? Okay, it would have been different if Ukraine had a smooth sail into becoming a NATO country. Then Poland can start to think about the symbiotic relationship. What are we going to get? What is going to happen with respect to trade, bilateral relations, etc.? That has not been a total success at this point. So Poland has to introspect. There's no embarrassment here. We just have to check, okay?
If there's no embarrassment, sorry, Mr. Yeniji, if there's no embarrassment, why has Poland decided to announce its withdrawing from supplying arms to Ukraine at this particular time?
So what I'm telling you and what you will see, if you watch Joe Biden and if you listen to his speech, if you reflect on it for a minute, he said, Russia alone, he repeated it twice. He said, Russia alone is the one standing in the path of peace. And I told you about 3 months ago that this war, that everybody is tired. I specifically mentioned that the resources to continue to prosecute this war are no longer available. So when Poland makes that statement, it is another move to say this war must end now. You will also find that Joe Biden left out China. when he was talking about the military support that Russia is receiving. He specifically mentioned North Korea and Iran. He left out China. Meanwhile, China is the last big support that Russia can receive. It means that we have come to the point where the war must start winding down. It does not benefit anybody. And the statement by the Polish government just says to you that everybody should start thinking of ceding positions. The pressure is on Russia to end this onslaught. Ukraine, for some reason, has been able to advance beyond what we thought, even claiming to have taken back a significant part of Crimea and being able to attack Russian installations there. So we don't have a choice. We don't have the resources to continue to prosecute this war. Many more nations will start taking prospective, proactive steps into saying enough is enough. And Poland has just taken the lead there.
Well, it might be interpreted that Poland's decision is as a result of the WTO move of the Ukrainian government and nothing to do with the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. But to the United Nations now, and the call by President Zelensky for Russia to be held accountable, he mentioned something yesterday. I'd like your buy-in on this, where he says that Russia should be removed from the Security Council. That Russia's veto power should be stopped. Is that a possible solution? Is that feasible at all?
Well, I'll tell you the truth, there's at least one more nation that we are waiting to decide what happens to Russia. That nation is China. So all the options are on the table to say, okay, what other threats can we make? Okay, these trade sanctions have worked only to a reasonable extent. Putin is still standing, unfortunately. The Russian economy has taken a hit, but it's a little stable right there. So if we then say that Russia is violating what he stood by regarding peace to the rest of the world, would it be enough for Putin to back down? But Putin doesn't want to go out being seen as someone who's lost a battle even before it began. So it is in Putin's own interest to start to think about the compromises which require to be made. I think that's just a threat, but the United Nations and the rest of the world will have to see how China responds to that to see if it will be carried through. Personally, I don't think it will happen.
President Erdogan says the negative approach of countries towards Russia is not helpful in this situation. What's your view?
I agree totally with the president of Turkey. Again, there is no international politics without you having local acceptance. And we must always consider these indices. Now, all of a sudden, Boris Johnson of the United Kingdom is no longer being sought regarding international matters. He himself has consolidated his popularity locally. Now, what that means is that each president of the world would have to do what is in the best interest of its own people. You already see, even in Nigeria, that our position regarding the spate of coups on the continent has been questioned regarding the legitimacy of our own past elections. It then presupposes that each president or world leader would have to garner local support, first of all, before aligning themselves in the way that is beneficial to their own citizens. We heard that from the speech of the Nigerian president at the United Nations. So the Turkish leader, Erdogan, needs to consolidate his own position as a president who has experienced national mishaps, including the earthquake there. So he needs to speak in support of Russia because he expects that his trade relations with Russia and China should remain intact. And it is only on that basis that his people will not question his own leadership. So he's definitely looking out for Turkey. And then somebody must be seen to be speaking for Russia at this time.
Speaking of the United Nations General Assembly now, what's your overall view of the impact of the Assembly of the war on Ukraine? Do you think, war against Ukraine, do you think that there has been any, has yielded any proper fruit? Do you think that Ukraine is the better for this United Nations General Assembly, or the worse, or it's indifferent?
I understand your question very clearly. And one would have presupposed that the United Nations would have taken a more bold step or bold stance at the start of the war up until now. But instead, it would seem that NATO has effectively taken that. Now, I'll tell you where we are in the world at this time. There are several economies that are not stable at this time, along Europe and, of course, in the United States. The United Nations itself enjoys the fastest allocation from the United States. Unfortunately for it, even the United States doesn't have so much funds to support the United Nations anymore. The former president of the United States, Donald Trump, started his own directive, if you like, to say make America great again, putting America first. So the United Nations has to be careful to be able to select whatever war it wants to engage in. At this time, the world is teetering on food insecurity. Ukraine and Russia are big exporters of agricultural produce. Now, there's no United Nations if we don't have food to eat. Even climate action appears to have suffered the heat in that countries that are dependent on fossil fuel and oil exports are beginning to question whether it is priority to address climate change at this time, especially when we have unstable economies all over the world. Now, if you align all of these thoughts, it is not in the interest of the United Nations to get involved as at the forefront of prosecuting or also defending Ukraine in the war. So for Ukraine, it takes what it can get, which is the United States promising long-term supply of arms and ammunition and weaponry, but that the rest of the world will focus on the war in Russia when we have unstable economies all over the world, spearheaded by United Nations. It is not going to happen at this time. It simply is not priority.
Finally, the attention somewhat was shifted to the United States for the UN General Assembly while the fighting went on at the front lines in Ukraine. What's your impression of the state of the counteroffensive?
Oh, well, the counteroffensive is doing well. I said that to you a while ago. Many people wanted miracles at the beginning of the counteroffensive. Ukraine has surpassed expectations, my own expectations, and I'm sure for a lot of territories of the world. Because, I mean, Ukraine is as advanced. Ukraine is able to target Russian installations right there in Crimea. It's able to hoist its flag in Crimea. So the counteroffensive has exceeded expectations. I think that we should make a point of that. By now, at the rate at which Russia was moving in February, you would think that many more cities would have been lost. Kyiv, Donbass, all of them right now. That I mean that Russia would have had total control, but Ukraine has been able to hold its own. Unfortunately, the world or the rest of the world can't do much more than we are doing at this time to support Ukraine. We can only have the present state of the art, what is happening, continue, and then we'll see by the first quarter of next year. The rest of the world is considering budgetary options in the new year that you have to tackle the impact of climate change, which is becoming even more obvious. We've got hurricanes, we've got earthquakes all over. We've got Turkey to try to rebuild. So we can only leave the war as it is right now and start to push that it winds down. Ukraine has held its own thus far, but there's not going to be any major pushback from the rest of the world to force Ukraine to totally repel Russia. I believe that the journey to the end has started. One can only hope that it won't take so long for parties to come to the table and then resolve this conflict, at least for the short term.
We hope you're correct, because anyone on the side of peace is hoping for de-escalation of the conflict. And we thank you for your time this morning, Mr. Yinko Yeniji, International Affairs Analyst, who joined us from East Midlands in the UK.
Thank you very much. Have a great weekend.
Welcome to the second stretch of today's coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. President Volodymyr Zelensky met with lawmakers on Thursday to appeal for continued support in the war with Russia amidst Republican skepticism over whether Congress should approve a new round of aid for his country. After seeking to shore up international support to the United Nations, President Zelensky came to Washington on a trip across town that included a meeting with military leaders at the Pentagon, President Joe Biden, and an address in the evening at the National Archives Museum. While President Biden and most congressional leaders still support aid for Ukraine and Biden's Democrat control of the Senate, President Zelensky faces a tougher crowd than when he visited Washington 9 months ago. He briefed the full U.S. Senate in the Capitol's historic Old Senate chamber, receiving several standing ovations.
We spoke about a lot of different questions. We were happy that senators, the Congress, White House, really United States, of course, first of all, people of America really support us. We supported from the first days of full-scale war and now together with us, and we spoke about everything, about support, about the situation, the battlefield, about our plans. I can't share with media all the details, but I think we had very strong dialogue with senators.
President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, meanwhile, his visit to Washington, D.C. concluded with the announcement of a new security package from the White House, even as further aid from the U.S. Congress is up in the air. The aid will include arms and equipment from defense stocks. And despite his rousing speech in Washington, D.C., the question of whether the U.S. Congress will approve more aid to Ukraine remains murky, as Republicans on the far right express frustration with government spending. Ohio Republican Senator J.D. Vance feels there should be no more requests. He wrote this in a post on X, including a letter protesting increased aid and signed by 28 Republicans. One of the signatories, Kentucky Senator Rand Paul, later wrote on social media that he opposed any effort to hold the federal government hostage for Ukraine funding. And we're now joined by lecturer, Department of Political Science and Public Administration, Dr. Michael Ogu, who's speaking to us virtually from Nottingham in the UK. Good morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning, Olumide. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being with us. Do you have a sense that U.S. support for Ukraine, particularly aid, is being politicized in Washington?
Yeah, thank you very much again for having me. You know, the issue with the financial aid that Ukraine is getting from the U.S. definitely is being politicized. I mean, you have two political parties, the Democrats and the Republicans. And while the Republicans, you know, are the ones, of course, spearheaded by Joe Biden, you know, who are at the front line of support for Ukraine at this time, you can see that the Republicans, you know, the Republicans have a pinch of, or are taking the pinch of salt, you know, and they would try to politicize. They would try to politicize it and say, oh, we're spending too much. And of course, the U.S., you know, has been the greatest support for Ukraine in this, you know, in this war. You know, with the finance, the materials that have been sent to Ukraine, the training for Ukrainian soldiers, and all of that. You know, so a lot of resource has gone into the war in Ukraine from the U.S. And so definitely, of course, the Republicans, you know, would begin to, or I think are already beginning to politicize, you know, the aid that Ukraine is getting from the U.S. Saying that it is too much. And of course, it is too much, definitely, from the look of things. But that is the only way Ukraine can keep standing, you know, in this onslaught.
Concerning the conflict in Ukraine, has the United Nations General Assembly, in your view, lived up to expectations?
I was listening to your conversation with the last speaker, and you asked him a similar question, you know, and I actually think that the hands of the United Nations are tied, because the United Nations, you know, is of course is an intergovernmental organization that is charged with international peace and prosperity and all of that. And of course, Ukraine, yes, you know, is also a subject, you know, in that sense of the UN. So UN is also charged with the responsibility of ensuring that Ukraine, you know, enjoys peace, enjoys prosperity, and all of that. You know, and of course, Russia is a key stakeholder in the United Nations system. You know, so the battle between Ukraine and Russia, and of course the position of the US and other superpowers, you know, who are also members of the Security Council, you know, has not put the UN in a very, very good position to mediate in this conflict, and of course to see any sustainable progress or a sustainable influence in the conflict. So while the world, and of course, while it is expected that the UN should do more, I think that the UN, the hands of the UN are tied, and that's why it's obvious that the UN cannot even broker, the grain deal or bring it back to the table and ensure that the grain deal, continues to operate. Because of course, it's just a very sad situation for the UN, because we would expect that they have more influence in this conflict, but it is obvious that they're not measuring up to standard, and that is not. It's not far-fetched. It's not their fault too, because there's so many stakes in this issue, and it's just unfortunate.
If it's not their fault, and President Erdogan is saying that the approach towards the attitude and the posture of nations towards Ukraine is negative, foreboding and forbidding dialogue with Russia, why isn't the United Nations Secretary General or other nations beginning to see things in that light? Not to support Russia, but to open up a window of opportunity where Russia, invited to negotiations again, will see that these nations are trying to be impartial and neutral and are listening to their own side of the story, thereby making Russia more open to forays for peace.
Yeah, first, you would agree with me that the UN Secretary General has been echoing this call for dialogue, call for peace talks, even right from the beginning of the conflict. But the UN has a reputation of being an instrument of the US, in promoting its national interest and its foreign policy. All right, and of course, Putin sees the UN also as perhaps as a machinery of the West, to propagate the whatever agenda they have. So the UN already has that tinted status, which of course puts it at the negative side in spearheading any kinds of call for dialogue, which Putin would see as objective, as open, as fair. And that is why you see that's why you see that there are several other leaders, the Turkish president and several other people who are trying to come into the picture and see if they can mediate. But of course the UN already has a very stereotypical status, which in this particular conflict doesn't position it well to mediate any kind of peace. And I think that is another reason why it is put in a tight corner, because Putin doesn't trust the UN. Putin doesn't trust the UN as an agent of the West and of course of the US as well.
President Zelensky has made presentations to the US Congress. Now he's up in Canada to see Justin Trudeau and get more aid. Weapons are being supplied from left, right, and center. More aid is coming from the United States. There seems to be no end in sight. As the UN General Assembly, this particular edition ends, what is your overview of their performance in this matter?
Well, I think that the Ukrainian president can only go about canvassing for support, and that's the only way Ukraine has been standing this long. Without the support that it's getting from the West and its allies, Ukraine would have fallen a long time ago. So for the war to continue, he has to go about canvassing for support, and it's only as he gets the support that he can put his feet on the ground and continue to execute this war to safeguard the interests of his country. But in terms of how the UN has fared in this General Assembly, I think that the General Assembly is just it has just been another. It has just been another statutory gathering, of world leaders. And of course, if you listen to the Chinese president's remark, which I was very particular about in the UN General Assembly, he was talking about the fact that ceasefire, call for peace, are the only way, to end the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. But the question is, what effort has he made, in that particular direction? So for me, it is just all rhetoric, and there's really no plan for action. There's really no clear-cut path to peace that is brokered by the UN. So I actually think that the UN General Assembly has just been another, a meeting of world leaders statutorily that they have to gather and discuss and just put up a front, But the war continues, sadly, and while we hope that perhaps there will be an end in sight, and of course, peace is the only way. Peace talks, rather, is the only way that this war could end. But there's really no end in sight as it stands now. There's really no end in sight. Of course, it is only if the parties involved can come to the table to say, okay, let's see how we can reach compromises. And at this point, none of them, is willing to reach any compromises in their demands and the demands they're making from one another, actually.
And that obviously leaves us stuck between a rock and a hard place. The counteroffensive continues. It's a very bleak outlook we're looking at. The counteroffensive itself, depending on which side you're looking at, is some progress on the side of Ukraine. Russia is thumbing its nose at it and saying that, no, you're not doing as well as you say you're doing. As a matter of fact, you're failing. President Putin has said that Ukraine's counteroffensive has failed in its entirety, but Ukraine is still making some advances. What's your outlook?
Yeah, definitely. Just like you said, Ukraine is definitely advancing. Is definitely advancing. The fact that Ukraine is still standing, compared to Russia and the heavy weight that Russia brings to this battle, the counteroffensive is successful. If you ask my opinion, it's successful, and I think that bearing the support that Ukraine continues to get from allies that are supporting it, it will continue to advance. Of course, how far it will advance is still something for us to continue to hope for, and it is still something. It's subject to speculations, but Ukraine is advancing. It's advancing, and the counteroffensive is successful. But of course, you can see that the positions that that some of the Eastern European countries are taking are Poland, Hungary, I think it is, Slovakia. That those issues might bring some kind of setback to Ukraine. But all in all, I think that the counteroffensive is slowly but surely progressing.
And speaking of Poland and the issue with Ukraine, how do you perceive that particular affair?
Yeah, I actually think that there's so many issues involved here. Of course, there's also the issue of national political interest. The political party is very close to elections, and they're trying to gain favor with the electorate. Of course, most of whom are farmers, whose produce, whose businesses have been affected by the Ukrainian grain import and the passage of grain through the Polish through the Polish economy. So it is obvious that there's some level of political interest in this, which of course the political party is trying to maintain its preference in the mind of the electorate as they go towards the elections. So that for me, I think, is what is taking the upper hand in this issue. Because if you look at Romania as well, which also has the same issue, they are not so forceful as to banning grains from Ukraine or banning the fact that their country should be used as a passage for Ukrainian produce, because, I mean, they actually have an election that is coming up next year, I think. So for them, it's not really an issue it's not an issue at the moment. But Poland, Slovakia, these countries have elections coming up. So I think that the political interest, national political interest of these countries is one very, very key factor that is driving this issue. And of course, I mean, it is not every country has to look out for their interest first. So you wouldn't blame them so much for taking these actions against Ukraine.
Indeed, finally, because it's clear as day, these nations, Poland in particular, has been a very, very ardent supporter of Ukraine, and they also have a responsibility to their own people, as they have a responsibility to the European Union as well. But in this case, do you think that maybe Ukraine didn't exhaust all its options in dialoguing with their good friend Poland before they publicly announced they were suing them to the WTO, which will make them look bad, open them up to criticism in the eyes of their common foe, which will be Russia. And then Russia will say, I told you so. The Ukrainians, they can't be trusted, and not what, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, of course, there could have also been some diplomatic way out of this. I think the Ukrainian president, could have used more diplomacy, in approaching this issue. And I think that the sanctions even became worse after the Ukrainian president's address at the UN General Assembly this week, rather. So yes, it's obvious that there could have been some more diplomacy, involved in ensuring that the rift doesn't escalate beyond what it was initially. But yes, as it stands now, Poland, seems to be trying to drag out Ukraine, and of course, it appears that the enmity, is getting deeper. But it is likely that that feud between Poland and Ukraine would likely be resolved. I mean, it's not so deep. It's not so deep. I think that the leaders involved can come back to the table, and find a way out of this. But it might not be until after the elections, in Poland, because I think that for Poland, that is what is at stake now, and that's what they're focused on.
Indeed, if Poland and Ukraine have issues, the only ones the better for it will be Russia. So, and we thank you. We thank you for your contribution this morning. That is Dr. Michael Ogu, Senior Lecturer at the Department of Political Science and Public Administration at Babcock University, who joined us from the UK. Thank you for being with us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome to the tail end of today's coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. The Prime Minister of Greece, Kyriakos Mitsotakis, addressed the UN General Assembly on Thursday to reiterate his country's commitment to Ukraine in the war against Russia. He also talked about the devastation of Storm Daniel, the worst to hit Greece in over a century. He spoke in the context of climate change, which he remarked is no longer a crisis of the poorest.
The assertion on Russia's part is that NATO, the EU, the other partners that support Ukraine will eventually lose the stomach to continue that fight. Now let me be clear. This should not happen, and this will not happen. We will never walk away from Ukraine, because to do so would be to abandon the very principles of peace, democracy, and adherence to international law that so many in this room hold dear, and sustainability for all. It is a laudable goal. Greece was struck by Storm Daniel. The Thessaly region, in the center of the country, saw twice as much rainfall in one day than falls in London in an entire year. It was the worst storm to hit Greece in over a century. And Daniel carved its destructive path not only through my country, but through Libya too. I accept, of course, that the climate crisis is not an alibi for everything, but the science is clear. Unprecedented temperatures, fueled by global warming, are creating the conditions that drive these catastrophic events. And this is no longer a crisis of the poorest or the global south. Our own very unequal battle with nature is now being fought out across the European south, and the Mediterranean in particular was razed to ashes.
Prime Minister of Greece, Kyriakos Mitsotakis. Now, Russia has announced a ban on gasoline export and diesel fuel export as well. To put it into context for us is Channels Television business correspondent Ini John Mekwa. Ini, good morning.
Good morning.
So that has happened now. Is this because they want to keep everything in the family?
Yeah, well...
Or they need that at home?
Yeah, they need it at home because remember we talked about the shortage of diesel and fuel to especially the eastern part of Russia, that's called the breadbasket, and how that has affected food production, because that's the area where you have mostly agricultural produce and crops, farmers, that's where it comes from. So, and because of the attractiveness, yesterday we talked about how the ruble has dropped and exporters are making more money because, of course, the dollar now pays even more, and then the government have that policy they want to bring on board where they can also get from that. But what the other side of that is that oil producers and refiners now see it more profitable to export their diesel and fuel. And because of that squeeze, the price of diesel and fuel now becomes more expensive back home in Russia, making it more difficult for people. And of course, the circulation, because of the supply, also has also hit parts of the country. So now they've announced this ban, and it takes effect immediately, except for 4 ex-Soviet countries. That's where they'll still be exporting. I mean, it's very drastic, you know, when you also see the fact that Russia is going to feel the impact. But I mean, they have a result now, because immediately after that was announced, in the home front, the prices of diesel and fuel dropped by 4%. You know, so because now there's supply. So, I mean, within the country.
As opposed to profit sharing from the situation outside the country.
Exactly. So they're getting what they want. It's still new. We don't know if there'll be other ways out of it. But for now, and you know, Russia, when they make such an announcement, they ensure that everyone sticks to it. At least the people, the government wants to stick to it. So it's working for them. There's now more domestic supply of diesel and fuel. The price has already crashed about 4% already. And guess another gain that Russia is making from this. You know, they've been controlling the price because of their cut, 1.3 million, Russia and Saudi Arabia. They've been cutting for about 2-3 months now. They say it's going to last to the end of the year. That has been what has been tightening supply globally, and prices have been going up. You know how we talked about how they are now exporting less but making more money from fuel, you know. So this, because after that kind of stabilized the cuts and everything, so we saw prices dropping as at yesterday went down, even though it was still ranging around $90 for a barrel. That was crude, Brent and WTI, you know. But it started going down again because everything was stabilized. The Fed had held rates, and, you know, China is boosting its demands. Their policy seems to be working, bringing back demands and all of that. But now with this that Russia has done, because of course the markets and investors will calculate the loss of not getting supply from Russia. And so we have seen the prices boosting again this morning, you know, when it comes to Brent and WTI, still ranging around the 90s, but I mean, recovering from what he had dropped a couple of days ago.
Would you know how that impacts external revenue for Russia? Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to reduce if they are not exporting, if they're not selling, you know, to other countries. But they are only putting a ban on diesel and fuel. So if they say have their other crude or refined, you know, other petroleum products that are refined, then they'll pay. But obviously it's going to reduce their revenue. But I guess it's a price they want to pay to take care of the domestic front, at least at this time. We don't know how long it will last. I guess once they feel that the domestic demands have been met, they might just lift the ban, you know, and go back to normal.
So you give something to get something.
Exactly.
Thanks, Ini.
Thank you for having me.
Finally on the program, after a private meeting with United States Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin at the Pentagon on Thursday, President Zelensky visited the National 9/11 Pentagon Memorial to lay flowers. He was accompanied by his wife, Olena, and then President Zelensky also visited Washington after addressing the United Nations in New York and has now arrived in Canada. And that's it on today's special coverage of Russian invasion of Ukraine. I'm Olumide Macaulay. Thank you for watching.